Hello, everybody, and welcome to Mission Control, a podcast focused on executive directors and nonprofit leaders and how they strive to make positive impacts in their community. I'm Paul Schmidt, your owner and creative video strategist for UnoDeuce Multimedia, and I am glad to have a good friend of mine on the show today, CJ Clark, the current executive director for Living Water Ministries. Hey, CJ, how you doing?
Hey, Paul, I'm doing pretty well. How about yourself?
I'm good. So, it seems like looking back, I've known you for close to 2 decades, and I think I met you at a camp.
Probably.
But I know that I didn't grow up being a camp kid.
Yeah.
But that just seems to be probably the overarching theme for most of your relationships to this point has probably stemmed from being in a camp.
It has. Yeah, camp has been a through line for my life. Having been a camper at the camp I now live at and run the nonprofit that I'm the executive director of. So I live at the camp, and I was a camper here, and I was a summer staffer here as a young adult, and then came back in 2005 and have been doing this full time this is now my 17th year. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So what is basically the mission of Living Water Ministries?
Living Water Ministries, essentially, our mission is to bring together all of God's children for faith-filled experiences of service, leadership, and community. And that's the driving statement that informs a lot of the programs that we do and how we go about implementing our programs, that has to tick those boxes of faith formation, service, leadership, and community. And we take real seriously bringing this phrase in our mission statement, which is bringing together all of God's children. And what does that mean, and how far-reaching does that go in a camp setting that was originally designed to serve congregations for the ELCA Lutheran Church in the Lower Peninsula of Michigan? We've now kind of redefined how far beyond that denomination we go. We certainly still serve that church, but we see ourselves as an expression of that church into the world. And so that's really brought a whole lot of new life and new partnerships and new campers and new experiences to the foreground.
So let me go back a little bit and talk about the draw to going into camping ministry. What did it say to you? I mean, obviously it created some type of draw. What was that?
Yeah.
What was that trigger?
Yeah. I think it goes back to when I was a camper. As a middle school age kid, I was here 3 different summers, and I can't tell you specifically what we did every day, but I can tell you how I felt. And I felt like I was in a place where I was loved and valued and accepted truly for who I was. I didn't have to pretend to be something else. I didn't have to try and fit in. I was given grace and forgiveness for the mistakes that I would make during the week. Like, the community was just a supportive, loving, encouraging one. And I remember that in the relationships I had with the other kids in my cabin and my summer staff people, and even the church that brought me. We had a group of kids that came, and we did Bible studies and kind of community time with each other. And I remember just how that felt. And it felt so unique and so special. And it stuck with me, that sense of belonging and acceptance. And so that's when I became a young adult, and I always kind of thought, well, maybe I'd go back there and work in the summer, and I'd kind of let that go. But an opportunity kind of hit me at the last minute one summer, and they had a shortage of staff, and I had a friend working, and I got invited to be on staff, and I dropped everything in my life and I went. And then I ended up serving for a couple of summers before I graduated college. And while I was doing that, the same thing, the way I talk about it is like, as a camper, you experience this like love and value and acceptance radiation You're exposed to it and it's beautiful. But then as a summer staffer, you're experiencing that radiation week after week after week after week for about 10 weeks. And it just sinks in more deeply and is all the more powerful. And you're not only feeling that love, value, and acceptance, but you're providing it for others and creating these sacred spaces with kids. And it's just intoxicating. So I I caught kind of a bug to work in the summer when I was a camper. When I was a counselor, I thought, I wouldn't mind, being the director of this place. And I spent probably about 6 years trying to align my life so that I could have the resume and the skill set and the knowledge to come back and do that when it was available.
So even early on, you thought about this was your destination, career-wise.
Yeah. I remember I was 30 years old when I got hired to be full-time director of the camp that I live at now, Stony Lake. And I remember thinking, well, now what? Like, I got there, I'm 30 and I've been dreaming about this for 6 years. And like, is this just it till I retire? Like, how is this going to work? And here I am 17 years later. So,
well, there's some shifts in that 17 years later. However, let's go back to talk about how you said that you wanted to get some skill sets to make sure that you were prepared to be somebody here that's full time. What did that essentially look like? What did that look like for you to make sure that you had the proper tools in place?
Yeah. The funny story. So I graduated college in 1998 December, and between that time and 2005, when I was finally hired full time, I'd applied to be a camp director in this Michigan system 5 times in that short window. Every time it became open. Once at Mishaluka, which was a former site that we owned, and 4 times here at Stony Lake. And it was different iterations, part-time, seasonal. And so the time that I got it was the first time that it was full-time. And so I spent that time learning as I went. I'd submit a resume, I wouldn't get an interview, or I might get a reply back or whatever, and trying to figure out what to do. And I would talk to some friends who were trying to get into nonprofit kind of stuff too. And so I started to volunteer for the organization, started to network with people and decision makers within Living Water Ministries by contributing back because it was still a passion of mine. It was strategic to do that just so that I could build those relationships, but I really loved doing that, volunteering for Bass Lake Festival. I actually designed the logos. I'm a graphic designer by education. Designed the logos for Living Water Ministries long before I ever worked here. I designed some summer brochures and just gave of my time and sort of shared my skill and gift set and my personality. I went to an outdoor ministry training program through our denomination one year. And I got on a nonprofit board. I was living in Mount Pleasant, working at a community bank doing graphic design, and I got on a nonprofit board there so I could bolster my resume and give back to my local community. And I started a part-time youth ministry job on top of my full-time job at the bank doing graphic design so that I could continue to be involved in something that I was passionate with, be networking and be in the community of adult leaders and pastors and people that are engaging Living Water Ministries. So I just always tried to make sure I positioned myself well with the goal of trying to qualify for a job here.
Well, I think that obviously worked, and now you've come full circle. I shouldn't say full circle, but you've advanced to the highest situation within the camping, your camping system by going from camper to now executive director. How was that shift from just being like the local camp director for one of the camps to the big boss?
Yeah, it was a little terrifying. Up until that point, my work experience had been that I was a great second chair. Like when I was at the bank, I supported the community relations and marketing work of the bank. And so there was a marketing director. And I felt really good about my role making that person look good, and thought I was great at doing that. When I came to Living Water, I feel like I ran Stony Lake very well. But I really enjoyed hiding in the shadow of the former executive director and supporting his work and making him look good and the organization look good. And when he announced his departure, my immediate reaction was, well, we'll see who they bring in. I didn't have any interest in it really, and it gnawed on me some. And I honestly felt called to apply reluctantly, because I didn't know that I wanted that first chair.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a little terrifying. I went through the interview process and was just real honest about what my gifts were and what they weren't. And the selection committee made their determination and offered me the job, and I accepted it. But I had never I had spent at the bank budgets of up to $150,000 in advertising money, but I had never budgeted for an organization of this size. I had never hired a full-time staff person, done reviews. There's HR, there's higher level fundraising. Like, I was a great camp director that programmed this camp very well, and in a lot of ways was a programming person. And now it was a very huge shift. And so with me, kind of my story has a lot of moments in it where I either have to learn or it's not going to work. And so I just got busy learning what I needed to know, and leaned into not knowing, wasn't afraid to say, I don't know. I'm going to have to research that. I'm going to have to call somebody. I think the real secret of this work is knowing who to call when you need something done or to get the right advice. And so, the toilet breaks, you know who to call. The septic breaks, you know who to call. The freezer breaks, you know who to call. When there's an HR issue, do you have an HR attorney? And not being afraid to do that, because you can't know everything. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, how much of the networking and building your resume up prior to becoming actually a full-time staff member helped you in that regard of shifting into the executive director role?
Yeah, I think a lot. When I interviewed for the executive director role, I remember, and then full-time camp job here too. I remember leaning into one of the gifts I do think I have, which is relationships. I think I'm good at building and maintaining relationships, and that relationships of trust and reciprocity, and so that really has. I think I was able to leverage that, because I was in the network, I was a known entity, I was respected, I had proven my commitment. I think for donors, for adult leaders bringing kids, for even summer staff, who just wanted to make sure that, the person leading them was as passionate about what they were doing as they were, and I was able to leverage those relationships, I think, to do that.
No, I think that's great. And the fact that you were transparent in what you said, that you didn't have the full experiences of, but yet you were still hired for the job, says a lot about what the folks thought you could bring to the table.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really key. Do you think just because of your longevity with the camp, that was the camp system that you're part of, because we shouldn't refer to it just as one camp at this point.
Yeah.
But do you feel like that really played probably the major role because you did build that relationship through that time?
I think it was a huge contributor. I certainly think the longevity now is yielding different kinds of fruit at this stage of the game. And then I was about 5 years into being with Living Water when that transition to executive director happened. But I was 2 years, like I said, a youth director prior to that, and in the Living Water Ministries culture probably far longer than that. So I was probably about 8 years into the culture by the time I became executive director. So I think, all that did help. I remember at the interview, there was a panel of people, and we were sitting in a circle, and they were asking me a bunch of questions. And I feel like this was the question because I saw people's expressions, and I just was answering honestly, but they asked me, well, tell us why you're the right candidate for this job, you know? And I said, that's for you to figure. That's for you to decide. I don't know if I'm the right candidate for this job. You know, I can only tell you what I am and am not good at. And you know, this is the hard work you all have before you. But and part of that, you know, I don't want to sit here and tell you how I'm better than this, that, or the other person. Like, I'm me, and I have my gifts, and those gifts either fit well here or they don't. You know, and I could see on their faces like, all right, yeah, I like that. You know, I'm not just gonna BS you and try and get the job. I want you to be able to make the decision you need to make. So, yeah. And I think that, again, that's just part of the trusted relationships and being as transparent as I can. So
That's really awesome. Well, one of the things I want to circle back on,
yeah,
is the fact that you're a hugely creative person, both, you know, in your ideas and in what you put forth, but mostly within your graphic design background. How much of that has carried over, or have you grabbed for that's helped you develop the entity that it is?
yeah, I think it's been huge. It's a weird gift set. I think that's not typical for an executive director to have, and we talk about it internally a lot. Because certainly the time it takes to do all the graphic design for our organization is time that I probably should be spending fundraising and doing higher level stuff. But the cost for outsourcing it for the quality that we would expect would also be very high. So, yeah, and it helps keep it's critical because from the very beginning, I tried to create a brand around Living Water, if you will, I guess, or an identity, visual identity that really looked top-notch professional. You know, we are, in all honesty, kind of a mom and pop camping situation in the grand scheme of camp. There are some mega camps out there, and we are not that. But we are a powerful little engine of impact here, and our materials and our presence when we booth at conferences, or whether we're advertising on a national level or a state level, or our brochures, or how we go about that, I try and keep that looking pretty top shelf. And I think that's an important thing for parents and for donors and other constituents to take note of, because they want to feel like what they're involved in is put together. And so you need to look put together. And I think that's huge. But I think it's also helped me think through our kind of our whole communication plan. What's the voice of Living Water Ministries? How do we articulate what we do? We do this pretty full multi-page newsletter, full color piece that we've just started doing in the pandemic. And I write like 95% of the copy for it, you know. And again, that creates a bottleneck sometimes because it requires me to do it. And we're just now trying to kind of bring other people into the fold that can kind of adopt the voice and carry some stuff forward, because the fundraising need continues to grow. But yeah, the graphic design piece is such a unique skill that I can't imagine being an executive director and not having it, you know, because it helps you think. Because graphic design is really about it's a problem solving art, and that translates well, and it's just like, I like thinking about how a person experiences our brochure from beginning to end. Like, how do they open it? How, you know, what do they encounter first? And I think through like the physical aspects of graphic design as well as the communicative ones. And that's a gift set that also has translated into program development and some larger level visioning. Like, so if we're going to do a big thing, how are people going to engage it from step one all the way through? And it's the same brain work. So,
Well, moving into some of the executive director situations, I think one of the biggest aspects that you probably, and had to face and was difficult was to figure out the situation with Mishaluka, your largest camp, and
Yep.
the sale around that.
Yeah.
How was that for you?
Yeah. This is where this turns into a counseling session.
This isn't what it was meant for, but
yeah,
hey.
yeah. Let me unburden all my stress for. So we had, for those listeners that might not know, we were a system that had two camps. The one that we kept is called Stony Lake. It's on the west side of the state, and it's 16 acres on about a 1.5 mile long lake that channels out to Lake Michigan. It's a beautiful piece of property. But the camp that we had that we sold was a 365 acre camp with inland lakes in a beautiful wilderness in the northeast part of Michigan in the lower peninsula. And it was just like, real dark sky at night. The stars there were unmatchable. I mean, to be able to just lay down and look up at the sky. The property itself had, just flowed, and the water features and the different nature features there were amazing. And it was a very emotional thing to close and sell that property. And there were a lot of factors into that, why that decision was made. But it was emotional. I hadn't been a camper at Mishaluka, but I had my family had rented a home that was available on that site when I was young. I saw my first deer there. I had been a staff person there for a couple of weeks while I was a staff person here. There was a need to go support up there, and had probably one of my favorite camp weeks of my entire time being a summer staff person up there. I had been on a committee that put on a music festival there every year. And my youth group would go there in the winter. So it was just, for me, it was also a personal sacred place. But organizationally, we couldn't sustain two facilities, again, for a variety of factors. And so the board had made the decision to close and sell that camp in 2014. So it was a painful and emotional process for many, including myself. And it was very difficult to lead through it, because at the same time, as an executive director of any organization, I have to believe you're always way ahead of everybody else in your thought processes about organizationally what needs to happen, where the vision is, what works, what doesn't work. And so you're always trying to bring people up to speed to what you know or what you're seeing. And you're looking for some consensus around that too. And so like I was both very mournful, but also pretty resolved that there was just no other way forward. And so then you had to stand up. I had to stand up and lead forums explaining this decision while personally grieving, and yet having to be the voice of reason that said, this is why, and let me walk you through some of the numbers and how this decision was arrived at. And as you could imagine, when things are emotional, that's some people can hear that and some people can't, because it's just too mournful of a thing. And so just there was a lot of pastoring kind of work in that, or at least almost like a chaplaincy to just listen to people's lament and allow them that space to have it. So. Yeah, I don't know if I got to your answer all the way.
No, I think that's fine. But I'm hearing something that I want to connect to the next thing, which is you said that there's a lot of pastoring.
Yeah.
So was this part of your journey towards going into seminary? Was this part of that whole process of adding seminary to being an executive director?
Yeah, because you got all sorts of free time, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Why not add, a 4-year master's program? I've never thought of whether or not that influenced it. I think a pastoral way of being has been part of who I am. It's been what's drawn me to faith formation work and being at Living Water Ministries and caring about what kids come to know about God and Jesus and what that means for their life. And I'm even learning a lot still right now, because I'm in seminary, about what chaplaincy really looks like. I'm doing a hospital chaplaincy right now for my studies, which has been a phenomenal experience so far. But No, I started really discerning a call to ministry when I was a summer staffer, and a pastor told me that I should think about it. And I've never quite known if I should hate that person's guts or be appreciative that they said that to me, but they planted the seed in my head. And I had some family history. My grandfather on my mother's side was a pastor. He died before I was 2 years old, so I never really knew him, but there's a connection there. There's some family stuff there. My mom was a pastor's kid, and the way we were raised in the church, and my grandmother, his wife, was probably the definitive saint in my life. And so there's a call to it in that way too. But it was something that gnawed at me for a very long time. And in some ways, kind of getting back to the beginning of being 30 years old and arriving in this job and thinking, now what? Ever since I was 21 years old and that pastor said I should think about being a pastor, I'd been kind of running from it in a way, or putting it off. I thought, well, I'll do youth ministry a little bit and see if that satisfies the beast, and so I did that. And then Living Water, I think I've always been trying to satiate this sense of call with other ministry initiatives. And so here we are now, I think 20 some years later, 25 years later, and I'm deep into the process, probably graduating in 2024. Got a few big benchmarks to get through, but it just stuck with me, and I was able to say yes because the education became available at no cost. I could do it remotely and part-time, and there was no more reason to say no besides the immediate pain of taking on too much stuff. So so the Mishaluka stuff certainly opened up my eyes a bit more to the complicated and challenging nature of pastoring. You're always going to have people that disagree on different issues, that are more passionate about how services, your church service is put together, or what the traditions are in a specific congregation that might need to evolve or change or adapt. And what I found in myself in that scenario was it wasn't so terrifying that I felt like I needed to run from it. Actually, I felt kind of called to run towards that stuff and be a leader in the midst of that kind of turmoil, which I think a lot of congregations face in an increasing way in the world that we're living in now. So, yeah.
Well, speaking of the world that we're living in now, another hurdle, I'm just going to say hurdle because it's just a bump before you keep moving, is the pandemic.
Yeah.
And how that affected camp, and what kind of solution did you come up with moving forward?
Yeah. And I'd like to say that all the solutions were I just knew what to do. And that's how we got where we got. I think we are where we are because of the grace of God. But at the beginning of the pandemic, who's prepared when you're running a summer camp for the possibility of not operating for a summer? I mean, that's where all the revenue comes from. And so at the very beginning, a lot of the voices that we were listening to in our own camping network were saying, you will not fundraise back what you lose by not operating. You just give yourself that grace. You can't do it. And there will be losses here. And so we had projected, I think, like a $220,000 loss for that first year. We decided not to operate in 2020. I presented a budget to the board that would lose a ton of money to about $220,000. And we ended up navigating that year without losing any money. We had a 108% increase to fundraising. We got a PPP loan. We have an endowment from the sale of Mishaluka that generated some interest and helped us out. And we were careful about the ways we spent. And we were also able to retain all of our year-round staff without interruption. And so that was phenomenal and unexpected. We did not anticipate that happening, and I'm still trying to get my brain around it. And what we got really busy doing was we got really busy raising money. And we created a lot of fun ways for people to support and engage, whether it was a box of items that they got that they could kind of have a mini camp experience at home, or some T-shirts that supported a specific program, or doing a virtual 5K, or we do a big race in the fall every year that generates quite a bit of funds. We were able to just rally people and still try and figure out, in a very different way, how do we still follow our mission and bring people together, albeit individually, remotely, but around a common cause. And that's what we did year one. And we had a lot of fun doing it year one. It was really neat. And the energy was cool, and people were very supportive, and it was just very humbling to be a part of. And then we got to year two, and we decided to cancel a second summer. And we were in a strong position to do that because we were no worse off than we were the first time we made the decision. So I presented the board another budget that lost a ton of money, saying, I don't know, like, we hope that people will be generous again, but we don't know, and they were. We had some good interest earnings on our investment, and we were able to, just financially secure our health. So we've made it through this last fiscal year. It ends at the end of this month. And we will not have incurred any debt, tapped reserve funds, none of it. And we decided to build a new building that will be paid for by this summer. So in March of 2020, if you told me where we are now, I would have seriously laughed at you and just not even imagined it. Like, I would have thought we would have been laying off staff and trying to just keep this thing afloat until it could come back. So, yeah.
Wow. Well, talk to me about your new initiative for Camp for All. Because I think that's absolutely awesome and a key thing going forward.
Yeah. So we've been talking about this internally. One of my secrets as an executive director here is that I only ever make sure I've got the next year figured out. So I would love a 5-year plan, but I don't think those make any sense right now. And it's just never been the way we've moved through space and time. And so we got to August of this last year, and we were looking at some of our goals for 2022, knowing that our intent is to come back. And this would be our first time back after 2 summers of cancellation, which was a bit more cancellation than most other folks. We were really conservative and safe about what we wanted to do. We were, my donor relations cultivator, that's her title, she and I were on the phone having a one-on-one and daydreaming about possibilities. And one of my former staff persons, a person named Adam Delazine, had once said something to me that wouldn't leave me alone. I was talking once with him about wanting to bring 300 kids to camp for free. I said, I want to figure out how to raise money so that 300 kids can come to camp. And he just looked at me and said, why not all of them? And I was like, well, that's the right idea, but we have no capacity to do that at the time. So, but it never left me alone. And I was telling Beth about this. And then while I'm telling her about it, I start opening up our budget. I'm like, well, what would it actually cost to do that? And in a non-pandemic year, the normal amount would be about $250,000. So, 2015 or prior, before we went through the sale of that camp and found some new financial health, that would have been impossible. But I was like, man, $250,000 is way less scary than it used to be. We've had really great fundraising years. People are rallied behind what we're doing. What's the next level thing? And so we started to look into this idea of what it would take to do it and what kind of donor support would be required to get us there. And we had some money in reserve because we had scholarship funds we hadn't been able to spend for 2 years. And so we were able to reduce that $250,000 down to about $180,000. And I was like, man, I feel like this is possible and worth the risk. And so I met with every one of our board members individually, pitched the idea, kind of explained the math of it, and the worst case scenario, which is the worst case scenario is we don't raise a dime and we've got to pay for it out of pocket. And we have some mechanisms where we could do that. We'll lose some momentum, but we won't fall apart. And the conversation was really like, hey, we've spent the last 2 years making awful financial decisions around closing the camp, like where we're going to lose near $200,000 twice. Let's make a decision where we might lose that again, but for something really cool. And let's look at, we've been closed for 2 years. What's the best way to come back strong, and what's the best way for us to lean into our mission and really bring together all of God's children and create a path for that to happen. So that's where Free Camp came from, and everybody agreed to it. So that's sort of amazing. Like, I'm still trying to figure that one out. So we're in the process of, we offered it, it's going to happen, but we're also fundraising for it simultaneously. And we'll see how it all ends up. Yeah. My dream would be that we'd figure out how to be able to do it forever, but I think it's just a 1 year at a time thing. It's our comeback COVID situation, and then we'll figure out from there when we worry about 2023 how we deal with that. Yeah.
That's funny. Well, CJ, I could talk to you for hours on end about all the cool stuff that's happening in your camp, but we've got to come to a close. So What's the best way for people to find out what you're doing, hear more about Camp for all that stuff? What's the best way?
Yeah, so there's, I think, our website, elcalivingwater.com. And you'll find on there different videos about different programs, some of them produced by the fine people at UnoDeuce Multimedia. and you'll hear about Gift for Camp and all those things there, and be able to kind of look at the full gamut of programs we offer, from our anti-racism programs for high school kids to just sending your first grader for the first time to camp. So
great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for being on the show. I really, really appreciate hearing your story and your journey. That was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you all again for taking some time to listen to our program. And don't miss the next episode. It's coming out in a couple of weeks. And if there is someone you know of, or if you are an executive director and want to be talk about, or you want to hear about somebody's journey, please email us at missioncontrol@UnoDeuce.com. And if this is your first time here, please subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcasting platform and give us a positive review. Thank you all again, and see you next time in the Control Center. I'm Paul Schmidt. Thanks you.